love communities. They're freaking amazing. I've been building communities now for about 20 years. I used to lead community at GitHub, at XPrize and at Canonical for the Ubuntu project. And these days I'm a consultant. I work with a kind of a broad range of different companies, from small startups to large enterprises, to help them build communities. And what I want to kind of go through today is kind of some of the things I wish I'd known and some of the mistakes that I've made in the course of my career. I want to kind of dig through each of these one by one. Some of these are going to be very personal in nature, so be gentle, all right? And there'll be periodic sips of the old beer as I'm going through it. So the first thing I want to start with that I wish I'd known when I was kind of starting out in my career was that chucking things at the wall doesn't work well. And what I mean by this is, I think some community managers, and certainly earlier in my career, they kind of throw things at the wall just to kind of see what happens, just to see what sticks. I actually wanted to visualize this some way when I was preparing my slides, and I actually typed in cats stuck to the wall on Google Images search and thinking nothing's going to come up. And lo and behold, all of these beautiful things came up, which is incredible. But one of the things I've discovered in my career is that the best experiences in life are journeys, okay? So, for example, when you go to Disney World, from how you show up, how you park your car, how you buy your tickets, how you get into the park, and which way you go around the park, and how they map you, and the traffic flow, and when the restaurants open, it's all very carefully crafted to make sure that they can maximize the guest experience and get as many people through there as possible, okay? Another example is good restaurants, right? From how you show up and, get your table, and how they bring you water and your menus and all that kind of stuff. It's very carefully crafted. And it's the same thing with video games, right? For example, I bought this game, Luigi's Mansion, for my kiddo, which is really for me. And how you pick up the controls and how you use them, everything's carefully constructed. So over the course of my career, I wanted to visualize this in a way that made sense. And I designed this thing called the Community Participation Framework. And it works a little bit like this, is that first of all, think about like who your target audiences are. Is it developers? Is it translators? Is it docs writers? Is it just people to provide help and support? And then you need to onboard them to the first piece of value for them as quickly and as easily as possible. So for example, for developers, it would be, why on earth should I come and join the community and get involved? How do I set my tools up? How do I build the skills that I need to contribute code to the project? What kind of engagement can I actually focus on? Can I fix a bug? Can I add a feature request? And then how do they solve problems? Where do they go and ask questions and all those different pieces? And then how do you validate them once they've achieved that first piece of value? How do you celebrate what they did? And we're going to be talking a little bit about incentives later on because I think it's super important. Okay. So at this point, we're simplifying how people get to that first piece of value. So many community managers out there focus a lot on outreach, like blogging, social media, conferences and all that kind of stuff. And that's really important. But to me, if you go into all the outreach and you've not done your homework to make it simple and easy for people to join, then to use a marketing term, they're not converting and it's not going to work out very well. Okay. Now, what happens at this point is people then usually go through 3 different phases. They start out as casual members, then they become regular members, and then they become core members. So at the beginning of any community, you're kind of new, you don't really know anyone, you can't really figure out what's going on, you got a load of imposter syndrome. And it takes about 2 months psychologically to build a habit. So if we can structure enough things for them to do for 2 months, then they will stick, they'll be excited, they'll love being part of the community, and they'll become regulars. And when they become regulars, they're showing up most days. You've earned a browser tab, they're part of the community. And a small number of people will be super obsessive core members of your community. Now, I talk about this, these, especially this whole framework, but also these 3 phases in my book, People Powered, that I know some of you have got because I've seen some people chatting on Twitter about it. So the theme for each of these 3 different phases, in my mind, should be mentoring and support for the people who are the casual members. For the regulars, this is all about kind of enabling them to create, to generate content, right? To produce material that keeps people engaged. And then for the core people, this is about unlocking their wisdom so they can help you shape your community. I think this is really, really, really critically important. Now, you may be thinking, how do you get people from the casual to the regulars, God, that's delicious, to the core? Well, what we do is we use incentives to get people moving in that general direction. And I'm gonna put a bookmark in incentives right now because I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. Because again, this is something that I wish I'd known earlier in my career. Like if I had this model available to me when I started out as a community manager, it would have been so much easier instead of me just randomly trying stuff and seeing what works. All right. Second area here. This is ego. What, me? Can I have an ego? Well, let me tell you a story about ego. So I'm very lucky. I'm a very happy person, right? I got a great family, and I credit a lot of my life and my happiness to these two idiots, my parents. My dad, who I assure you is not Tom Selleck, and my mum, who is just the most amazing woman I've ever met. Okay, so here's the thing: I credit them to keeping me grounded in my life. You know, when I was younger, I looked like this. Look at that hair. That dressing gown is just covering what you don't want to see in this particular picture. Okay, look at all that chocolate, by the way. I was a complete pig as a child. This is Christmas one time. And I was not a very gifted child when I was at school. This is one of my, these are some grades from school. I got a C in 2Ds. Actually, in between kind of doing your GCSEs at school and then kind of going to university, you do these things called A-levels in England. And I got 2Ds, an E, and an N. Like an N is where you spell your name wrong in your exam paper, pretty much. It's just like, no, that's the grade. You know, it's a good example of how not gifted I was. You know, here is one of the reviews from my teachers for physical education. And when your teacher keeps using the word reasonable, you know that they're being nice. They're being kind to you, okay? So anyway, I was not a particularly gifted kid at school. Got interested in communities when I was about 18, 19 years old. I had hair at that time, and then it grew inwards and came out my toes. And I set up a community called Linux UK back in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. And set up Linux UK, and then I went to university, and I kind of got to know some people at university, got interested in another community called KDE. And there was an opportunity then to kind of go down and host a booth at a conference. So I went down and set up the booth and printed things on paper and nicked some rubber penguins from somebody else's booth to give them out as our own and claim all the credit. And I was in a bar one night hanging out with a bunch of people at one of the social events, and I met these two guys called Nick Veitch and Richard Drummond. And they said they were starting a magazine called Linux Format Magazine. And I said to them, is there any chance I could write an article for your new magazine? And they said, sure, but if it's crap, we won't publish it. And that seemed like a reasonable contract to me. So I wrote the article, and apparently it wasn't crap, and they published it in the magazine, and now my name was in the magazine. I felt pretty good about that. So I wrote an article about this organization nearby called Open Advantage, and they were kind of doing open source for people in the local area. A lot of factories back then were going to China to reduce costs, so a lot of people who were in manual labor were out of work. Anyway, so I wrote an article about them, and they offered me a job. And I was like, brilliant, I'd like a job. So I went and worked there. And now I could start flying around different places of the world, right? So I started doing talks, and I kept writing for the magazine. So my recognition in the community was growing and growing and growing. And of course, this feels great, right? And, started working on projects, founded a project called Jakosh, and put a little community up around that. The reason why I'm telling you this story is that one of the things that I think is amazing about life is that your network generates all these opportunities. Like you go and do something and you meet some new people, and then new ideas form, and you spread all of this kind of this creativity around, right? As I was going through this, and this is the embarrassing piece, I started realizing, or I started thinking to myself, you're kind of a big deal, you know? You're kind of a big deal, Jono, when it comes to community. One time, and this is so embarrassing, don't tell anyone, this is going to be our little secret. I was on a plane going to Brazil, and I looked around me to see if someone would recognize me. Yeah, I know all of you threw up in your mouth at the same time. Isn't that embarrassing? Oh, the ego. So anyway, I was talking to my parents about some of this stuff one day. These wonderful people. And my dad said to me, Jono, I love you, but you're getting a little bit too big for your boots right now. And it made me realize that one line from my dad, he was the kindest person in the world. He was right. I was letting complete anonymity in the scheme of things, grow my ego to a point that was completely unnecessary. And luckily, I don't think I let that ego out and, find the Jono's dad for your professional life. I love that, Vanessa. I don't think I let that influence my actions too much. I managed to catch it early, but I know a lot of people and they don't catch it early. And the thing about ego is it's incredibly annoying. People don't want to be around egomaniacs. So my view is this, is be proud of what you do, right? Be proud of your accomplishments. Don't let that hold you back. Dream big, inspire to be the best that you can be, inspire to build the most amazing communities ever. But be proud of your accomplishments, but let other people really kind of like celebrate you in the same way that ego would celebrate you. And I think that was such a valuable lesson. And now I'm always like super conscious about this. So by the way, if any of you like, Jono, you've got an ego the size of Bolivia, please let me know, because I don't want to lapse back into that. All right, recognize and reward. Now, Bolivia is not too big. I didn't realize in my early stages of my career just how important incentives are. I knew that, when people did good things in communities, you should always be engaging. Like, I had the engagement thing down. And it wasn't that I had any particular insight. It was just that it felt naturally to me. Like, when someone would join a community, I want to get to know them and kind of understand them and kind of hang out and all those kinds of things. Okay. But what I discovered is that there are incentives everywhere, right? From airline miles, like I collect mileage plus airline miles because San Francisco Airport's a United hub. So, this is one of the things where you celebrate getting United plus, mileage plus, and then you remember that it's United and you cry a little bit. For getting a coffee card stamped with your 10th coffee stamp, and you get a free coffee too. Reddit Karma, Fitbit rewards, video game trophies, all of these different pieces. The reason why incentives work and why they're so powerful is that the brain is essentially divided into two parts. It's called System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking. The System 1 thinking is your monkey brain. It's kind of looking out for the tiger in the bush. It is making sure that you're able to survive. You've got enough water and all these different pieces. It's the kind of thing where if Vanessa was to sneak up behind me and go, boo, first of all, I'd be extremely surprised because she's in my house. But secondly, it would be that motor reaction of kind of reacting to that, okay? The System 2 part of the brain is our logical, conscious thought. It's our so-called rational decision-making, which is actually very irrational, because our System 1 part of the brain completely influences how we make decisions. And this is the study of behavioral economics. So what's interesting about this is the reason why incentives work is because fundamentally we're hunter-gatherers. Like, we want to make sure we've got enough resources. So this is one of the reasons why we tend to kind of gather things and we hoard things, okay? So incentives are just an intrinsically powerful thing that work in communities. The key is that we focus on the desired behavior that we want to generate, right? So if you want to build an amazing group of people, whether it's in a company, a family, a community, think about what are the behaviors that you want to see. We want people to be kind. We want people to be empathetic. We want people to be collaborative, great contributors, active contributors, people to be open and transparent, all of these different pieces. Focus on what the desired behavior is, and then what you do is you generate your incentives that serve that behavior. And there's basically two different types of ways of distributing incentives. And this is something, again, I talk about in People Powered. I call them stated and submarine. Okay. Now, stated incentives are the kind of things where you say, if you do this thing, you get this thing. Okay. So a good example of this could be the GitHub Game Off, right? Like a good friend of mine, Lee Riley, who is the most incredible person in the world, despite being Scottish. So that was supposed to be a joke, and it just came out as racist. So I'm sorry to all Scottish people. But, they basically say, if you win the competition, you get these prizes. HackerOne, as you get karma and as you get reputation points in HackerOne, people will kind of recognize that, and you'll get rewarded for those in different ways as well. A good example of this is Stack Overflow or Stack Exchange. In the middle of the screenshot, if your question's been favorited by 25 people, then you get the favorite question badge, right? These are really powerful ways where you can specify the criteria. If you do this thing, you get this thing, okay? Now, that's cool and all, and I'd recommend you do that in your community. But I think submarine incentives, for me, really tickle the community management nerd, gland in my brain, okay? This is where you detect the behavior that you want to see, and then you reward people based upon what you discover, okay? So, to give you an example, I'm a big fan of a forum platform called Discourse. And one of the major reasons why I like Discourse is that they've got something built into it called a trust model. So when you start out in the forum, you kind of show up and no one really knows you. It's a little bit like someone knocking on your door at 10 o'clock at night. You don't know if they're a axe murderer or whether they're anti-Jane. And so they're kind of untrusted. So what happens is, as they participate more and more in Discourse, they go up to trust level 1. And then as they do more and more, they go up to trust level 2, and so on and so forth. So one of the things I often do with my communities is say, when someone hits trust level 2, we rebrand that as a silver member. And then we just celebrate people on the forum. We say, congratulations to George, to Doctor Who, whoever else, to Paulina, to Chris. Scammy, and we say, congratulations on doing this. It's social recognition, okay? We don't say, if you hit this level, you get this public recognition. It's just a reward. It's just a surprise out the blue. It's a random act of kindness. I wish I'd known this earlier in my career. This is so, so powerful. So, for example, the opensource.com team, if you write articles for them, based upon how many articles you write, they'll randomly send you backpacks. Mattermost, the first time you get something into the project, they'll send you a mug. They don't tell you this. If you are one of the top flight authors at opensource.com, they'll fly you out to Raleigh and you'll get to meet the Red Hat team and you get to go to a conference called All Things Open. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful. Okay, so I definitely recommend checking that out. Also, I mentioned discourse earlier on. If you're curious about the trust model that I mentioned, if you do a search on YouTube for discourse trust levels, I put a YouTube video up that goes into some detail about that. I've just started YouTubing recently, and put it this way, I ain't no PewDiePie. Right, I'm so uncool on YouTube. But if you like uncool videos and a balding Englishman, then go and subscribe and hit that like button. All right. Next, Vanessa says, Hawk from Discourses at Swarm this year. Hawk is an unbelievable human being. I'm just going to leave it at that. Just a fabulous, fabulous person. Okay, so let's talk about swag and shipping and rewards. Okay, so many of you will be thinking, okay, those incentives sound good, but what about the kind of rewards that we send out? Like, what should we be doing? Well, let me tell you a story about shipping. So I used to work at a place called XPrize. It's the only place I've ever worked that's got a rocket in the lobby. Okay, this is a place that has enormous competitions to solve major problems in the world. The very first commercial spacecraft was an XPrize competition. And it's funny, Vanessa says, is Elon hiding somewhere? Because the first prize that I worked on was called the Global Learning XPrize. This was a $15 million competition that challenged teams to build an Android app for a tablet that would teach kids how to read without the aid of a teacher within 18 months. It would also, they'd have to be able to read, write, and do arithmetic. And the idea is that there's 250 million kids in the world who don't have access to education. So, this is a tool that they can use. So one of my first orders of duty when I joined XPrize was to kick off a crowdfunding competition. And we needed to raise $500,000. Now, I'd done a bit of crowdfunding before. We had the $32 million Insano prize, Insano crowdfunding competition for the Ubuntu Edge, and we raised $12.7 million. But this was the first one I was running solo. And we managed to raise $942,000. I was really proud of it. It was hard work, but it was a lot of fun. And the reason why I mentioned Elon is Elon Musk funded most of the $15 million prize purse for this. So what happened is, with any kind of crowdfunding competition, right? You've got perks, right? You go and spend $20 on something, and you get a T-shirt and a bag and a sticker and something like that, right? So we had all these different perk levels. We had so many people pledging. I mean, you can see this in this screenshot. We had 2,244 people when this screenshot was taken who backed the project. That's 2,244 packages to be shipped. Now, when I said that, 2,244 packages to be shipped, I'm hoping that most of you shuddered a little bit, because that is the appropriate reaction to that statement. And the problem with this was that these were people from all over the world. And what I discovered about this is that, first of all, the cost of shipping is often more expensive than the items inside of the bag. But secondly, many countries in the world do not have particularly great package tracking systems. So, for example, we shipped a bunch of packages to Russia, and we couldn't track whether they arrived or not. So what happened is, if there was some error in the address and they didn't get there, they'd be returned, and then we'd have to resend them out again. And there were some of these packages where we spent hundreds of dollars trying to ship them, and it was like $30 worth of content in the package. It was ridiculous. So what I learned from this is, be very, very careful in how you work on shipping. Okay. And the problem that I have with this is that a lot of community managers default to swag as a means to reward people. And this is why I want to talk a little bit about intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. And I think I saw someone mention this in the chat earlier on. So extrinsic rewards are the physical goods that you send to people. It's the T-shirts, the challenge coins, it's the stickers, the Emmys. I don't know why I've got a picture of an Emmy in this screenshot. This is a comic book cover that we did for the best hackers at HackerOne. You know, so there's all of these physical things. First of all, stop sending people t-shirts, right? T-shirts are a nightmare because first of all, you got to have two different sizes. Like usually there's men's and women's cuts. You know, many women, rightly so, get annoyed with having to wear men's t-shirts. Then you've got to store multiple different sizes. You've got small, medium, large, XL, 2XL, 3XL, 4XL, which is also known as sysadmin medium. You've got all these different sizes that you've got to keep in stock, and you don't know how many you need to have in stock. So therefore, you have to buy a ton of t-shirts, and many will just sit in your office for weeks on end. They're a terrible, terrible piece of merchandise. And most t-shirts that people send out look terrible. They're awful. They have some crappy logo on the front. You only make a t-shirt if A, you can make the costs work, and B, it looks cool. It looks like a nice t-shirt, a fashionable t-shirt that someone want to wear. So I'm a big fan of challenge coins. Challenge coins are these big kind of, where is it? I don't have one on me. I don't know if you can see my camera right now. I think you can. But this is a lens cap cover. But they kind of usually about this kind of big. They're big, thick, meaty metal coins. You can get them designed and make them look really cool. They cost about $2 or $3. You can put them in an envelope. But they're so cheap to ship. They're amazing, right? So I like those kinds of extrinsic rewards. The other thing I like about extrinsic rewards is people who is when you personalize it to the recipient. So, for example, one time, someone we wanted to reward in a community I was working with, we knew that they were really into dogs. So we found out where we could buy some organic dog treats, and we shipped them a bag of those to their house. And they were actually made in their town in Portland. So then it's personal, right? I love those kinds of different things. All right. Now, what I focus on more importantly is going to be the intrinsic rewards. This is the validation. It's the thanks. It's recognizing someone in a blog post. It's dropping them an email just to say thanks for being a part of our community. It's mention them on social media. Send them an invitation to an event or a webinar. Getting them on the phone with your executive team. Giving them a direct email address to your executive team. Referring them to somebody else. Giving them a testimonial on LinkedIn. There's all kinds of ways in which we can just recognize them and thank them digitally. And I don't care whether you are a CEO or whether you are an intern. Everybody needs validation. Everybody needs recognition. It's what makes the world go round. Okay, so intrinsic rewards, start there and then go on to the extrinsic. All right, next we're going to talk about data. So I didn't look at metrics when I started out my career. I just didn't. I didn't track them, and it's embarrassing. And I've looked back and tried to figure out why that was. And if I'm being honest with you, it's because I was scared of failure. You know, I didn't want to track something and then the graph go in the wrong direction and then get in trouble or lose the respect of my peers or my team. I saw metrics as it was a vector of risk, and it was a silly viewpoint to have. But you know, digging in, the reason why is because I was insecure, right? It was because I didn't feel like I was good enough, and imposter syndrome is a real problem with a lot of people. People get it at every step of their career. I certainly get it from time to time. It's completely normal. And I certainly had a bunch of it back then. But the problem is that when you don't track things, when you don't measure things, you turn into this cat. You get fat, you get lazy, you get complacent because you're not able to constantly see the growth happening. And you're not able to convert your assumptions into understanding that something isn't what you thought it was, right? So my view is that, so apparently this is Michael's cat. So first of all, I know some of you, the comment about imposter syndrome is resonating. First of all, it's totally normal, okay? I actually wrote a blog post about imposter syndrome that you might want to go and check out. If you do a search for my name, Jono Bacon, and imposter syndrome, you'll be able to find it on Google. That might be helpful. Everybody gets it, okay? It's not just people new to their career. It's completely normal. I know a bunch of executives who get it constantly, okay? It's perfectly normal. But if you don't measure it, you don't improve it, okay? And I've discovered that the definition of success is opportunity with preparation, right? And the way in which we prepare for success is that we measure what we're doing and we evaluate how we do, and then we make improvements based upon it. So the first time I really experimented with this was with what's called a burn down chart, and it looked like this. This is the burn down chart for my team. So the basic gist of this is we were plotting like the number of tasks we had to complete over the course of a 6-month period. All the ones that are done are marked in green, and then the orange and the yellow are kind of the ones that still need to be done. So as long as we keep the to-do ones underneath the trend line, that black line, we knew that we'd hit everything on track. First time we did this, one member of my team, David Planella, who now runs community at GitLab, just completely failed to complete all of his tasks. And what we realized from that was it wasn't like he was sitting around watching Netflix or the Tiger King, right? What he was doing is he wasn't estimating his work effectively. And that was one part his fault and one part my fault as his manager. So we worked on that. We resolved the estimation piece. And then the next cycle, we got it under the trend line. This is a really, really powerful way of being able to track progress. But the key thing about metrics is you have to do it in a safe way. You can't do it in a way where someone gets something wrong and then what happens? They get yelled at, okay? I actually applied the same thing for my book. So when I wrote People Powered, I created these 3 graphs, the number of pages that I've written, the pages that I have left to do within my 4-month writing plan, and the pages that I've got left to do. So, you know, I write very quickly, and the first cut of the book I managed to write within, I think, about 6 weeks. And this was great because this now told me, now I've got loads of time to do more editing, to send out to more people before I have to submit my manuscript to HarperCollins, okay? I also have used metrics for tracking things like responses to, to packages being merged into Ubuntu. These are some of the metrics from Discourse, for example. And I think what's so important about this is that we turn into kind of like a CSI Miami, right? Is what we do is we look at these graphs and we say, you know, what can we see in this? Like, why have we got those spikes? What happened then? What caused that? What can we learn from this? And then from that, we can derive a hypothesis, we can test the hypothesis, and then we can derive an interesting result, okay? Now, one thing I would say before I go on is there is a data fetishism going on in the world right now where people set up these ridiculous dashboards with 1,000 graphs, and they believe that we need all of the graphs because we may need to ask a question about something at some other point in the future. Don't do this, right? This is a complete waste of time. Because then you spend all of the time setting up the graphs, and graphs become a distraction. One of the things I'm discovering as I turn into an old crotchety man is that distraction is the enemy of productivity, right? For example, when I'm designing my training courses now, and when I'm designing a lot of new content, I do it on paper with a pencil in my back garden. I step away from my computer. Doing it on a computer is too distracting. So think about what are the questions we've still got in our community, and what are the minimum number of metrics that we need to define to answer those questions, right? For example, how long should it take to respond to a question on a forum? Okay, well, we probably need to track the average response time, depending on the type of contributor who's coming in. Is it staff? Is it community member? And then we can probably derive that. So think about the minimum number of things, and then that's how you can derive it. All right, so this is embarrassing. You ready for this one? You ready for some Schadenfreude? I think it is. Is that the right word? Or is that a cheese? I don't know. All right, so a number of years ago, my career was really blossoming, right? And I got invited to go and do a keynote at a conference called OSCON. And this was in the glory days of OSCON. The conference just wrapped up this year, actually. And this was going to be in front of about 5,000 to 7,000 people. By far the largest presentation I'd ever done. So what I did is I had my keynote slot, which was 10 minutes. And then I also had, a usual 45-minute session. Putting together the 45-minute session, no problem. That was easy. I'd done that a million times before. But what I did was I really struggled with the 10 minutes. And the reason why is because I like to tell stories. And there's got to be a start, a middle, and an end. And there's got to be meaning behind it. And I was struggling to do that in 10 minutes. So I basically went up and did it. And if I'm being honest with you, it was a 10-minute, it was a fluffy pitch about community, lots of waffle about transformation, and then an elongated advertisement for my 45-minute session later in the day. To put it bluntly and simply, it was crap. It was not good. And I got off that stage, and bear in mind, this room is filled with my peers. It's filled with my peers. This is a conference that everybody went to. And I walked off and I knew it sucked. And I got off the stage, and of course, everyone is like, oh, great job. And of course, you liars. No, it wasn't. It was terrible. but no one's going to come up to someone after they've just got off the stage and say it's terrible. So I go up to my friend, this guy called Steve Wally, who works at Microsoft now. And Steve is just a lovely human being, a lovely spirit. And I said to him, oh man, it wasn't good, was it? And he said, here's the thing, Jono. Some people are good at writing short stories and some people are good at writing novels. And he was like, you're great at writing novels. You suck at writing short stories. You need to get better at writing short stories. So I was like, wow, that's really a good point. I'd never flexed that muscle and grown that muscle in my experience. So that was insightful, and I knew what I needed to do. That was something I needed to focus on. But now I had to deal with the rampant embarrassment of dealing with this. So I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do here. And I was going, and I was at the conference, I was seeing people, and every person I met, I thought they were judging me, and it was an awful experience. So I went and curled up in the corner of the convention center and I wrote a blog post. And I said, I did a talk at OSCON, a keynote at OSCON today, and it sucked. And that was redemption for me. It was a means to kind of get that out there. And actually the organizers of OSCON came up and they were like, it was really cool that you did that. Like, very few people are that honest and pragmatic when they kind of screw up. And what this taught me was content comes in many, many different forms, right? And we always get used to one form. Maybe you're good at blogging. Maybe you're good at making videos. Maybe you're good at podcasting. But we've got to develop these skills in all of these different forms for community people, because we are, by definition, communicators. So that was a rather embarrassing experience, and I suggest you don't do it. All right. What's next? We've got the feature suggestion snafu, which sounds like a episode of The Big Bang Theory. Many of you will have the challenge of, how do you get input from your community in how you improve your product, your community, whatever it might be, whatever you're focusing on. A lot of people throw up these kinds of things like Fitbit do, where people submit ideas and then people upvote or downvote those ideas. I would strongly suggest that you don't set one of these things up, one of these ideas forges. And let me tell you why. So a number of years ago when I was at Canonical, we had the same idea and we set up Ubuntu Brainstorm. And I don't know if you can see here, but we had like thousands of ideas and thousands of comments and hundreds of thousands of votes as we were, that would go into this. But the problem with this is that what would happen is someone would submit an idea such as the second one here, which is fix, suspend, and hibernate. Now, the way Ubuntu worked in computers is that it ran on lots and lots of different laptops, and you could never possibly make suspend and hibernate work flawlessly on all of them. So while there was always one computer that didn't work properly, we could never close this. So the problem is that most of your community members, most of your users, are not going to be very specific in terms of what they want. And sometimes the top voted things in here will not be the most important strategic things that you should focus on in your product or your community. So this is not, in my mind, a good way of doing things. What I've become a fan of is an approach that a company called Superhuman use for their product. Now, Superhuman is basically an email service. It's kind of like Gmail or Hey. It's $30 a month, so it's not a free thing, but I can justify it because my view is if I can save half an hour a week, it more than pays for itself based upon my billable hours, right? Now, I'm going to walk through what they do, what they call their product market fit engine, and I think this is going to rock your world. This is really, really cool, okay? This has rocked my world recently. I've been obsessing about this. So the basic gist of this is they sent out a survey to all of their customers, and think about sending this out to your community members. And they basically said, how would you feel if you could no longer use Superhuman? And they gave them three options. I'd be very disappointed, I'll be somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed at all. And what they did is they also asked them, like, what is your role? What company do you work for? What are the things you love most about Superhuman? What are the things that you feel like are missing from Superhuman? Okay. So they took the people who'd be very disappointed if it went away. So those are your most passionate people. And they basically analyzed what role do those people fit into? And these are the ones that they found: founder, manager, executive, and business development. So what this taught them was these are our audiences. Because the biggest challenge I think any company faces is how do we assign our resources the most effective way to the audience that's going to care about what we do. So now they knew where to focus their marketing, their outreach, their community development. Okay. Now, what they then did is they then looked at what that group of people, the people who'd be very disappointed if it went away, loved most about the product. And they found out that it was the keyboard shortcuts, the speed, it was the focus, it was about moving faster. These were the things that really came up. So these are the things they started marketing more and more. They started talking more and more. They supported the kind of the onboard and the email nurture in celebrating those particular features. And a good example of this is speed. They talk endlessly about speed, right? Now, what they say, and the CEO of Superhuman, I met him at a conference called The Lobby a number of years ago, and he was telling me about this email thing. I was like, whatever, email, I don't care. But he's a really smart guy. I actually had him on my podcast, Conversations with Bacon. And one of the things he said was, you have to politely disregard those who would not be disappointed without your product. They are so far from loving you that they're essentially a lost cause, right? If you start building features for the people who would not be disappointed, then you're not delivering value for the people who really care about what you're doing. But his view was, how do we get to the people who are not super enthusiastic about what we're doing? Those are the somewhat disappointed if Superhuman went away. So they segmented, and then they looked at what would be the things they would want in the product to make it really awesome. And this is what they came up with. A mobile app, better integration, better search, better calendaring, attachment management, all of those different things. That gave them their roadmap. So if you follow this methodology with your community, it's an amazing way of highlighting your audience, and it's an amazing way of focusing on where you should, zone in your efforts most in terms of your engineering. And then what I recommend you do is you put that into your roadmap, and then you share what's going to be happening with a public roadmap, right? So for example, ConvertKit do something like this with their roadmap, and this is really cool. Alrighty. It's a pretty cool framework. So if you do a search for Superhuman product market fit, there's a great article that Rahul wrote up on First Round, I think it is. Actually, scratch that. Do a search for Superhuman product market fit and Coda. This is a company my wife and I just invested in recently. It's kind of like Google Docs on acid. It's amazing. And he's got like an interactive model that you can use. All right. Next one, be careful with leaderboards. I think this is our penultimate one that I'm getting to here. So this is a fairly quick one. So years ago, like many people, had the idea of, wouldn't it be cool if we had like leaderboards for what people are doing in different parts of the community, right? So I asked one of the guys on my team, Daniel Holbach, to build this. This was the Ubuntu Hall of Fame. And as you can see here, it would list kind of the latest members, the upstream bug rock stars, top 5 a day contributors, latest developers, all of these different pieces. And what I didn't realize that I now know is that it really annoyed a lot of people, because for the people who were on the leaderboard, they loved it. But for all the other people who weren't on the leaderboard, which was the vast majority of people, they felt like a little bit disappointed. They felt like they didn't level up a little bit. And I think part of the reason I think the reason why that is because communities strive to be meritocracies, right? So this is a word we often see in communities. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, the idea of a meritocracy is that people are judged based upon their merit, based upon what they do, not the gender, or not their gender, the color of their skin, their sexuality, all of those different pieces, right? And one of the things that would often be celebrated in the early days of communities, and especially in open source, was we're a meritocracy. That's how we function. Look, all of these great stories of people who didn't come from a computer science background doing amazing work. But the problem here is that meritocracy is a great North Star. I think it's a great thing for us to strive towards, right? But it's not the reality of the world that we live in, because as we know now more than ever with, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, is that not everybody starts from the same position. Not everybody has the same level of opportunity. So therefore, the challenge with something like a leaderboard is that you're assuming that everybody's starting from the same point, and therefore you're celebrating the people who get to that point, but they may have had a level of privilege that wasn't available to everybody else. So to me, like, some people will think meritocracy is a bad word. I don't think it's a bad word. I think it's a vision. It's a North Star. It's something we should strive for. But what it isn't is it's not a framework. I think if you think of it as a framework, you then ignore all of the inequality that sadly is in the world. And we should obviously be striving for equality. So In response to that, some years later, I had some experimentation and built something called the Ubuntu Accomplishments Platform, which was basically a means in which people could discover things to do, and it would give them the steps for them to get started. So, for example, they could click on one of these badges, reporting your first bug, and it would actually walk through how to do that. And I found that a much more effective model, in terms of enabling people to get started contributing to a community. Okay. Now I'm going to focus on the last one. And this is the most personal of all of these, if I'm being honest with you. Here's the thing. I used to work at a company, and I wasn't happy, right? Like, I had a great job. I was being well paid. I was doing some fun work. I had worked with a great team, but something was missing. And then what I decided to do was to leave the company and figure out what I was going to do. And shortly after that, I went to Mexico with my wife. And this is my favorite place to be. On a beach, looking at my feet and my weird left big toe, which I injured trying to impress a girl. I bought some Doc Marten boots, and I was cheap and bought the size 2 sizes too small, and it screwed up my toe, and I had to go into surgery and have it operated on. Yeah, I'm an idiot. But laying here with a beer and just kind of hanging out, right? And I was trying to think, like, what do I really want? Like, what do I want in life? And what I discovered was I love building things, and I want to build a business. Like, I'm a bit of a control freak. I love being in control of my life. I like working from home. I like seeing my son whenever I want to. I like taking off on a Friday afternoon and playing guitar with my friends. I like doing talks at 8:45 p.m. on a Friday night and having a drink with my friends on the internet. This is the kind of stuff I love doing. I don't like having to get social media posts approved and submitting expense reports and all that kind of stuff. It sucks. So I realized I need to set up my own business, and I want to be a consultant. And I flirted with this idea for a while. But then I realized, oh God, that sounds terrifying. What if I don't get enough work? What if I'm not very good at what I do? What if I do work and people think that I suck, and then they tell everybody that I suck? What if I don't earn enough money? Can I support my family? Like, my wife and I at the time, we weren't rolling in dough. She was running a startup, and she wasn't taking a salary, right? Everything was in equity, right? So it wasn't like we had a lot of financial cushion. We had a bit of cushion. And what I realized was, thinking through all of these different pieces, what was controlling my thoughts was anxiety. Now, I come from Northern England, and do you remember my parents that I talked about at the beginning of this presentation? They're incredible people, right? I love them. I mean, thankfully they're alive today. They're wonderful human beings. But where I grew up in North Yorkshire, people didn't talk about anxiety. People didn't talk about depression, right? That was something that happened to other people, right? People didn't have anxiety. It was like, just pull yourself together. Stop complaining. Stop whining was the kind of attitude that some people had. Certainly when I was a kid. Now, fortunately, I've never suffered from depression. And thank God, because I know a lot of people really have a difficult time with it. But I've definitely experienced anxiety and continue from time to time. So I started reading into this, because when I discover something, I kind of go down the rabbit hole. I obsess over everything that's new to me. And I started reading about mindfulness. One of the things that mindfulness people say is that think about anxiety as clouds in the sky. So imagine you're laying on your back. It's a beautiful warm day, and you're looking up. And instead of like seeing the clouds and trying to change the clouds. Nicola grew up in Lancashire. Instead of trying to change the clouds, just see them and let them float past. Don't try to change them. Just observe them, acknowledge them, and let them float away. And this was the thing that was mind-blowing to me, was you can't get rid of anxiety. But what you can do is you can recognize it, understand that it's there, but then don't let it impact you. And this is when I started reading a lot about Stoicism. And Stoicism is basically the idea that you can develop kind of a little additional voice in your mind that is always saying, like, how do we want to deal with this objectively? You go into a meeting with your boss, and your boss is angry with you, right? Often we'll feel like coiled spring tightening up, and then you'll say something you didn't mean to say, or you'll wish you said something that you didn't say, and you'll regret the outcome. Whereas the Stoic voice will say, okay, this is very uncomfortable. How do we want to get the best possible outcome? Okay, let's maybe solicit some more information, understand the problem. Maybe we can work towards a solution, a very measured approach. It's a philosophy that goes back thousands of years. So there's a bunch of books about this. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I always thought this was going to be one of those ridiculous self-help books that people like Tony Robbins write, where you have to walk on hot coals and talk about transformation all the time. It's not. It's an amazing book. The Obstacle is the Way is a phenomenal book. I actually have copies of it, a pile of them. And when some friends of mine are going through tough times, I send them a copy of this. This was the book that convinced me to start my business. Because it basically said in every obstacle, there is a lesson. There's something exciting in there that we can learn, that we can take away. And a friend of mine, she was diagnosed with cancer, and I sent her a copy of the book. Another friend of mine was laid off. Another friend of mine, his wife left him, sent him a copy. So, this is an amazing book. And then you've got other books like Nudge and Predictably Irrational to help us understand the psychology of how we kind of operate. And what I realized back then when I was thinking through this, laid on that beach, drinking my beer and thinking through things at a higher level, was I wasn't brave enough. I just wasn't brave enough. But here's the thing, and this is the reason why I wanted to mention this at the end of my session, where we've talked about lots of failure and lots of things that we wish we'd known, right? And lots of the things, you're probably thinking of all the things you wish you'd known, is that tomorrow is a new day. It's a new opportunity. It's a new way of looking at the world. It's a new way of trying things, of challenging yourself, of inspiring yourself, of inspiring other people. That to me is what makes communities amazing. Sure, it's the forums and the social media and the blogging and learning all the tactics. That's cool and all. But it's changing the opportunity in people's lives. That's what I love about what we all do. And that's one of the reasons why Swarm is such an amazing conference, because it's all about that. Okay.